Have you ever felt that no matter how hard you try to do everything right, no one truly sees you? That behind a plain uniform and work-worn hands, there's a heart beating just as deeply as anyone else's? Today, I'll tell you a story that will touch your soul in a way you never expected. Imagine a woman who wakes up every day at 4:30 in the morning. She brews a thin cup of coffee, kisses her sick mother on the forehead, and walks 40 minutes to work. Her name is Clara. At 32, she carries the weight of a life that seems to have forgotten how to smile at her. Clara works as a stock clerk in one of the city's largest supermarkets. While hurried customers fill their carts without even glancing her way, she arranges shelves, restocks products, and cleans aisles with a dedication few notice. To most, Clara is invisible, just another employee, a presence only noticed when something is out of place. But there's something different about Clara. As she works, she whispers prayers. Not desperate pleas, but intimate conversations with God like someone talking to a close friend. Her faith is simple, genuine, without theological flourishes. It's the faith of someone who found in God not just hope, but companionship for the loneliest hours. On the other side of this story is a man who owns everything money can buy, but lost something no fortune can return: the ability to see beauty in the simple things. At 45, Eduardo Rodriguez is the owner of a supermarket chain that stretches across the state. He lives in mansions, rides in armored cars, but has never stepped foot on the floor of his own stores. He never noticed workers like Clara. Until one day, tired of financial reports and meetings filled with numbers, Eduardo decides to do something he never had before: visit one of his stores personally. Not as the owner, but disguised as an ordinary customer. And that's when two completely different lives cross paths in a way neither of them could have imagined. What if I told you that behind a cheap uniform and calloused hands was the woman who would teach a millionaire how to truly love? That a simple conversation about faith wouldn't just change one heart, but would transform an entire supermarket chain? That the purest kind of love could be born in the most unlikely place? This is a story about how God uses the humble to teach the powerful, how humility can outweigh any fortune, and how true love always finds a way, even when it seems impossible. How many times do we pass by people like Clara and never see them? How many times do we judge someone's worth by the clothes they wear, the car they drive, or the address where they live? This story will make you rethink all of that. It will show you that the greatest treasures are often hidden in the simplest places, and in the humblest people. Clara didn't know her life was about to change forever. She didn't know that every whispered prayer at work was not only heard by God, but was also preparing the heart of someone who desperately needed a reason to live. She didn't know that her simple faith would be the instrument God would use to transform not just one man, but hundreds of lives. Eduardo didn't know either that he was about to discover that his entire fortune meant nothing compared to what a simple woman had to teach him. He didn't know that he would leave his house that morning as a successful businessman, but return a completely different man. This isn't just a love story between two people from opposite worlds. It's a story of how God can use an invisible worker to shake the very foundation of an entire company. It's about how a single conversation can tear down walls built over decades. It's about how real wealth isn't in bank vaults, but in the generosity of the heart. You'll discover how Clara, even while facing the hardest challenges, never lost her ability to smile. How she turned a simple job into a quiet ministry. How her unwavering faith became a beacon of hope in a world that seemed to have forgotten how to believe in miracles. And you'll see how Eduardo, a man who had everything, realized he had nothing that truly mattered. How he learned that success without purpose is hollow, that power without love is destructive, and that true fulfillment only comes when we serve others. Some stories are born in palaces, others in mansions. But this one was born between supermarket shelves in the midst of everyday chaos, among people who work hard to support their families. It was there, in the most unlikely place, that God chose to write one of the most beautiful love stories you've ever heard. So take a deep breath, open your heart, and prepare for a journey that will move you, inspire you, and remind you that no matter where you are in life, God always has an incredible story written for you. A story that can begin today, in the simplest of places, through the humblest of people, but one that can transform everything around you. Prepare your heart, because what happened between Clara and Eduardo goes far beyond a romance. It's a story of redemption, transformation, and faith that will show you how God writes the most beautiful stories through people the world considers invisible. A story that will make you believe again that miracles still happen, that true love exists, and that God has a perfect plan for every life, even when everything seems impossible. Clara woke up every day with the same silent routine. 4:30 in the morning, no alarm needed. Her body was already used to the hour that separated her from the dream world. In the small kitchen of her rented apartment, she prepared a coffee that was more like colored water, but it brought just enough warmth to face one more day. Her mother, Dona Rosa, slept in the next room. The expensive diabetes medications consumed most of Clara's salary, but she never complained. Quite the opposite. Every morning she kissed her mother's forehead and whispered a prayer of gratitude. For Clara, taking care of someone she loved wasn't a burden. It was a privilege. The walk to the supermarket was long. 40 minutes she had turned into prayer time. While her feet moved through the still silent streets, her mind spoke to God. Not begging for miracles, but intimate conversations like someone speaking to a trusted friend. She thanked him for her job, her mother's health, the small moments of joy life still offered her. At Supermax, where she had worked for 5 years, Clara was simply known as the cleaning girl. To the hurried customers pushing carts down the aisles, she had no name, no story, no dreams. She was just a task, an invisible service repeated day after day. But Clara refused to let indifference define her. While organizing the cleaning supplies aisle, she softly hummed hymns she learned at church. Her gentle voice mixed with the sounds of carts and casual chatter, spreading a peace she didn't even realize. Though invisible, she left her mark through the kindness in her work and the silent prayers she offered for everyone who crossed her path. There were days when the weight of life pressed harder, when money didn't last until month's end, when her mother's medicine became even more expensive, when loneliness grew heavy. In those moments, Clara found refuge in a small chapel she had discovered near her work. There, among simple pews and a humble image of Christ, she let her tears fall and found strength again. The other supermarket employees respected Clara. She never took part in gossip, always offered kind words, and when someone was struggling, she was the first to help. Even earning so little, she had lent money to co-workers in need, never charging interest, always with a smile. "How can you always stay so positive, Clara?" asked Joanna, her supervisor, during one of their rare chats. "I'm not alone," Clara replied simply. "God is with me, and that makes all the difference." What Clara didn't know was that her quiet faith, unnoticed kindness, and invisible dignity were about to intersect with a life that desperately needed to learn what she already knew. That a person's worth isn't measured by their bank account, but by the purity of their heart and how they treat others, especially when no one is watching. As Clara organized shelves in that busy supermarket, God was preparing a meeting that would change not only her life, but also the life of a man who had forgotten how to see beauty in the simple things. A story was about to begin, born from the invisibility of a woman who had always been seen by God. Clara had her dreams, even if few knew about them. She dreamed of a small house for her and her mother, with a yard where she could grow flowers. She dreamed of affording better health care for Dona Rosa. Sometimes she dreamed of finding someone who would truly love her, but she quickly pushed those thoughts away. Who would ever be interested in someone like me? She'd think, staring at herself in the mirror each morning. But there was something special in Clara she herself couldn't see. Her presence brought calm to the atmosphere. Stressed customers relaxed when she helped them. Crying children stopped crying when she walked by. There was a light in her eyes that didn't go out, even on the hardest days. At the small church she attended every Sunday, Clara was known for her generosity. Even earning very little, she always found a coin for the offering. She always brought a dish of food for families in need. She always had a hug for anyone feeling down. "Clara is an angel in disguise," said Dona Lourdes, her elderly neighbor. "God placed her here to take care of us." And maybe Dona Lourdes was right, because there was something heavenly in the way Clara lived her faith. It wasn't just preached on Sundays and forgotten the rest of the week. It was lived in every gesture, every kind word, every moment of patience when someone treated her poorly. In the supermarket, Clara knew the stories of many customers. She knew Mr. Antonio was unemployed and sometimes couldn't afford his medication. She knew Mrs. Eunice was raising her grandkids alone after her daughter left. She knew young Marcelo was battling addiction and trying to rebuild his life. For each of them, Clara had a word of encouragement, a genuine smile, a silent prayer. She didn't know those small actions could change lives. She didn't know Mr. Antonio had once thought about giving up, but kept going, because that girl at the store always treats me with kindness. She didn't know Marcelo found strength to stay clean because there's someone who believes in me. Clara was invisible to the world, but her light shone brightly in the kingdom of God. And when God wants to do something extraordinary, he always chooses ordinary people with extraordinary hearts. Clara was about to discover that her invisibility had been preparing her for something far greater than she could imagine. Eduardo Rodriguez had spent the last 20 years of his life in executive meetings, financial reports, and decisions involving millions of reais. His world was small, even though his fortune was enormous. He knew every number in his company's balance sheets, but not a single face of the employees working in his stores. That Tuesday in October, something different happened. Maybe it was the exhaustion from endless meetings, maybe a restlessness that had been growing inside him for months. But Eduardo made a decision that would change his life forever. He would visit one of his stores personally, not as the owner, but as an ordinary customer. He chose the Supermax on Central Avenue, one of the busiest stores in the chain. Wearing simple clothes, he dismissed his driver and took his own car there. When he stepped into the parking lot, he felt something strange. He hadn't entered a supermarket as a shopper in decades. Whenever he needed something, someone else got it for him. It was in the cleaning products aisle that he saw her for the first time. Clara was kneeling, organizing items on the bottom shelf. Her movements were careful, almost reverent, as if every gesture mattered. Eduardo stopped, not out of obligation or corporate protocol, but because of something he couldn't explain. There was a peace in that woman that he hadn't seen in a very long time. Clara looked up and met the gaze of a simply dressed man watching her kindly. He smiled, a genuine smile that made her blush. "Excuse me, could you help me find a product?" Eduardo asked, even though he knew exactly where everything was in his own stores. "Of course, sir. What are you looking for?" Clara replied, standing with the agility of someone used to the job. "Mild detergent for delicate clothing." Clara guided him to the right section, explaining the differences between the brands with a knowledge that impressed Eduardo. But it wasn't just her knowledge that impressed him. It was the way she spoke, with genuine patience, as if she truly cared about helping. "Thank you," Eduardo said once she finished. "Have you worked here long?" "5 years, sir. I really enjoy what I do." Eduardo was surprised. She enjoyed it? An employee earning minimum wage to stock shelves actually said she liked her job. "And what do you enjoy the most?" Clara smiled, a sincere smile that came from deep within. "I enjoy the people. Every customer has a story, and somehow I can help make their day a little better." In that simple conversation, Eduardo discovered something he had lost long ago, someone who found purpose in serving others. He left the supermarket that day with more than just mild detergent. He left with a restlessness he couldn't explain. The next day he returned. He told himself it was to check on the store, but deep down, he knew he wanted to see Clara again. He found her in the same aisle, now arranging household cleaning products. "Hi," he said simply. "Hi," she replied, blushing slightly. "Back for more detergent?" Eduardo laughed. "Actually, I came to see how you're doing." Clara was surprised. No one had ever returned to the supermarket just to check on her. "I'm well, thank you for asking. Can I ask you something personal?" Clara nodded. "How do you stay so at peace, even with such hard work?" Clara paused for a moment before answering. "I talk to God," she said simply. "He listens to me, and I feel like I'm not alone. Even on the hard days, I know there's a bigger purpose." Eduardo, who had been distant from faith for decades, felt something stir in his chest. This woman had something he had lost along the way, a connection with something greater than herself. The conversations became routine. Eduardo started visiting the supermarket almost daily, always finding an excuse to pass through the aisle where Clara worked. He learned that she cared for her diabetic mother, that she walked 40 minutes each day to save on bus fare, and that her joy didn't depend on external circumstances. It came from an inner source he couldn't quite understand. Clara, in turn, began to look forward to those encounters. There was something different about that man. He truly listened. He asked about her life. He seemed genuinely interested in her thoughts. For someone used to being invisible, that kind of attention felt like a gift. "You're different from other customers," Clara said one day. "Different how?" "You see me. Most people look past me, like I'm part of the scenery. You see me as a person." Eduardo felt a lump in his throat. How many people had he looked past over the years? How many Claras existed in his company, unseen by his eyes? "Maybe it's because you taught me how to see," he replied. Clara smiled. "It's God who teaches us to see. I'm just here." What neither of them knew was that God was weaving a story that went far beyond logic. Two completely different worlds were crossing, not by accident, but for a greater purpose they would only understand when their hearts were ready for the truth. The conversations with Clara had begun to change Eduardo in ways he never expected. For the first time in years, he started paying attention to what was happening beyond the financial reports of his companies. He decided to do something he had never done before: observe how his stores actually worked. Not as the owner, but as someone who genuinely wanted to understand the people behind the operations. What Eduardo discovered shocked him deeply. He saw exhausted employees working double shifts just to cover basic bills. He saw people like Clara arriving at dawn and leaving late at night, completely invisible to management, but absolutely essential to everything running. He saw the stark contrast between the air-conditioned offices of the executives and the poor, cramped conditions of the workers' break areas. One afternoon, Eduardo decided to talk to other store employees, always introducing himself as a curious customer. He uncovered stories that touched him deeply. Dona Conceição, who had worked in the meat department for 10 years, had never taken a vacation because she needed the extra income. Josue, the young man collecting shopping carts in the parking lot, studied at night and dreamed of going to college, but could barely afford a technical course. "I never thought about any of this," Eduardo confessed to Clara during one of their daily talks. "I've been so focused on numbers for so long, I forgot there are real people behind them." Clara looked at him with that simple wisdom that always impressed him. "Sometimes God has to shake us out of our comfort zone, just so we can see what was always in front of us," she said gently. Eduardo began to see his company through different eyes. He realized that while the business made millions, the people who truly kept everything going lived with salaries that barely covered their basic needs. He saw how extravagant bonuses for executives could instead be redirected to improve conditions for hundreds of workers. He began making quiet changes. He instructed his directors to upgrade employee break rooms, install comfortable rest areas, and review their benefits policy. But he did it all without revealing his identity, posing only as suggestions from an external consultant. "Why don't you identify yourself and make the changes directly?" asked his financial director during a meeting. Eduardo paused. The truth was, he had discovered something powerful. When you meet people where they are, when you speak eye to eye, you learn things that can never be seen from a boardroom. "Because this way, I see the truth," he replied. "From my office, I only see numbers. Down here, I see people." Clara began to notice the changes at the supermarket and was surprised. The women's locker room had been renovated. A new break room was built. Shift schedules were adjusted so no one would be forced into excessive overtime. "It's amazing how the company is improving things for all of you," Eduardo casually said during one of his visits. "It's a miracle," Clara replied, her eyes sparkling. "I've been praying about this for so long. God really hears our prayers." Eduardo felt a lump in his throat. Clara was attributing these changes to God. Prayers answered. But for him it was becoming something far greater, a lesson in what it truly meant to lead with heart. "You pray for your coworkers too?" Eduardo asked. "I pray for everyone here. And for you too," Clara replied naturally. "For me? Of course. I pray that God blesses your life, your family, your dreams, that He helps you find your purpose." Eduardo was silent. How long had it been since someone prayed for him, since anyone genuinely cared about his well-being, without expecting anything in return? That night, alone in his empty mansion, Eduardo reflected on everything happening inside him. He had more money than he could ever spend, but Clara, earning minimum wage, was richer than him in everything that truly mattered. She had purpose. She had faith. She saw beauty in life even amidst struggle. For the first time in decades, Eduardo knelt to pray. He didn't quite know how to begin. His words were clumsy, but his heart was honest. "God, if you really exist, help me understand what's happening inside me. Help me be a better person. Help me use what I have to make a difference in people's lives." It was a simple prayer, but it came from a heart finally opening to a transformation he couldn't yet understand. 3 weeks after their first encounter, Eduardo and Clara had developed a friendship that surprised them both. For Clara, this kind man had become a breath of fresh air in her heavy work routine. For Eduardo, those daily conversations had become the most important part of his day. It was on a Thursday afternoon that everything changed. Clara seemed more tired than usual. Her eyes had lost some of their usual glow. Eduardo noticed it right away. "Are you okay today?" he asked with genuine concern. Clara hesitated before answering. She wasn't used to sharing her personal problems, especially with a supermarket customer. "It's my mom," she finally said. "She had a diabetic crisis last night. I had to take her to the hospital. The doctors say she needs a new medication, and it's expensive." Eduardo felt his chest tighten. "And now? Now I pray and trust that God will provide," Clara said, with a faith that deeply impressed him. "He always has, up to now. But, aren't you worried?" Clara gave a sad but genuine smile. "Worry is a lack of faith. My mother always told me that. She used to say, 'Clara, if God feeds the birds of the sky who neither plant nor harvest, how much more will he care for us, his children?'" Eduardo was silent for a long moment. This woman faced hardships he couldn't even imagine, yet she had a peace he had never experienced, even with all his wealth. "How do you do that?" he asked. "How do you keep your faith even when everything is going wrong?" Clara stopped stocking shelves and looked straight into Eduardo's eyes. "Because I know I'm not alone. I know someone greater than me is taking care of everything. It doesn't mean I won't have problems, it just means I won't face them alone. What if God doesn't provide the medicine? He will provide. Maybe not in the way I expect, but he always does." Eduardo felt a surge of emotion he hadn't felt in decades. Tears began to form in his eyes. "I lost that," he said, voice trembling. "I lost the ability to trust, to have faith. I control everything, plan everything, and still, I feel empty." Clara stepped closer and gently touched his arm. "Faith isn't something you lose forever, it's like a seed. It might be dormant, but it never dies completely. Sometimes it just needs a little water to grow again. And what's the water? Prayer, humility, the willingness to trust again. And sometimes," she smiled, "the friendship of people who still believe." In that moment, Eduardo made a decision that would change everything. He left the supermarket and went straight to the hospital where Donna Rosa was being treated. Without saying who he was, he paid for all of her care, including the expensive medications she would need for the coming months. When Clara arrived at the hospital that night, a nurse gave her the news. "Miss Clara, someone has paid for all your mother's treatment. They asked to remain anonymous, just said they were a friend who wanted to help." Clara fell to her knees in the hospital hallway and wept, not from sorrow but from deep gratitude. She knew that was an answered prayer. What she didn't know was that God had used a millionaire's heart to bless her. When Eduardo returned to the supermarket the next day, Clara greeted him with a radiant smile. "A miracle happened," she said, eyes gleaming. "Someone paid for my mother's treatment. God is so faithful." Eduardo smiled too, feeling a joy he hadn't experienced in years. For the first time, he had used his money for something that truly mattered. And the result wasn't just Donna Rosa's healing, but the healing of something in his own heart. "I told you he would provide," Clara continued. "God never fails. Never." Eduardo nodded, and at that moment, he knew his life had changed forever. He wasn't just a rich businessman anymore. He had become an instrument in God's hands to bless someone else. And that meant more than all the millions he had ever made. In the weeks following the miracle of Donna Rosa's treatment, Eduardo found himself caught in a deep inner conflict, one that consumed him day and night. His conversations with Clara had grown deeper, more intimate. He found himself sharing dreams he had never voiced, fears he had always hidden, and longings he hadn't even known he had. Clara, in turn, also began opening up more. She spoke about her difficult childhood, about how she had found God in her darkest moments, about her simple dreams of living peacefully with someone who truly loved her. And when she spoke about love, Eduardo felt his heart race in a way he hadn't experienced since his youth. He was falling in love. Not just with Clara's simple beauty, but with her pure soul, her unwavering faith, and her ability to find joy in the smallest things. But how could he reveal the truth? How could he admit that he was the owner of the company she worked for? How could he explain that he had hidden his identity from the beginning? "Do you have a family?" Clara asked during one of their conversations. Eduardo hesitated. Technically, yes, he had an ex-wife, but the marriage had ended years ago, destroyed by unchecked ambition and emotional coldness. He had 2 adult children who barely spoke to him, children who saw him only as a distant provider. "I don't really have a family," he answered honestly. "I have kids, but they grew up without me. I was always working, always building the empire, and I forgot to build relationships. Does that make you sad?" "Very much. I have everything I thought I wanted, but no one to share it with. No one who truly cares about me." Clara gently touched his hand. "Well, you have me. I care." Eduardo felt tears sting his eyes. When was the last time someone had said that to him with such sincerity? "Clara, I need to tell you something." "What is it?" Eduardo opened his mouth, but the words wouldn't come. How could he explain that their entire friendship had been built on a half-truth? How could he tell her that he was one of the richest men in the country, while she struggled to buy her mother's medicine? I'm not exactly who you think I am." Clara smiled. "I know you're special. From the first day I felt there was something different about you. You don't speak like other customers. You don't act like them. You carry yourself with a kind of dignity, like you come from a very different life." Eduardo was surprised. "You knew?" "I knew you weren't just another shopper, but I don't care who you are or where you come from. What matters is who you are here, with me, in these moments. What matters is that you treat me like a person, that you care." Eduardo's heart broke. Clara had sensed the truth but didn't yet know all of it, and now he felt even guiltier for not being completely honest. That night, alone at home, Eduardo spent hours in prayer. It was new to him, this direct conversation with God, but Clara had taught him that prayer was simply opening your heart. "God, I don't know what to do. I've fallen in love with her, and I know she's starting to fall for me too. But I lied. Not about who I am inside, but about my life, my reality. How do I tell the truth without losing her? How do I explain that I'm the exact kind of person she's been taught to distrust? A rich man who exploits the poor." The answer didn't come immediately, but Eduardo felt a strange peace settle over him. He knew he had to tell the truth, but he also knew that timing was everything. Clara needed to know him well enough to believe that his wealth hadn't fully corrupted his heart, that the money wasn't who he truly was. But time was running out. Eduardo could feel Clara's feelings deepening each day, and every day he didn't tell her the truth made the eventual revelation more painful. The truth had to come out. The question was when and how. What Eduardo didn't know was that God was already preparing the perfect moment for everything to be revealed, in a way that would test not only the love growing between them, but also their faith in a greater plan neither could yet see. The days that followed were the most transformative Eduardo had experienced in years. His morning routine changed. Before the board meetings and business calls, he began his day by stopping at the small chapel near the headquarters, one that Clara had once mentioned. He didn't always know what to say in prayer, but he found comfort in the silence. He also started reading the Bible. The verses Clara had referenced now made sense to him. They spoke of justice, humility, love for the poor, and service to others. He realized he had been building his entire life on foundations that couldn't withstand emptiness. At work, his actions began speaking louder than his words. Eduardo created an internal audit not for financial reasons, but to investigate working conditions across all his stores. The findings left him speechless. Employees forced to work while sick, unfair dismissals, abuse by middle management, and even cases of harassment that had been covered up. "I never knew about any of this," Eduardo told his HR director. "With all due respect, sir," she replied. "No one ever wanted you to know." That night, Eduardo wrote a letter by hand, a circular to be read aloud at every branch. "To every employee of our stores, my name is Eduardo Rodriguez, and I am the founder of this company. I write to ask your forgiveness. I built this business with my hands, but I allowed it to grow without my heart. I stopped seeing people, and for that I am deeply sorry. From now on, this company will be guided not just by profit, but by purpose." That letter reached Clara's hands a few days later. She read it during her break, sitting on a bench behind the store. She knew those words weren't written for show. She recognized Eduardo's heart in every line. The other employees felt it too. There was a shift in the air. Managers who had once ruled with fear were being replaced. New training programs were introduced, encouraging empathy and emotional intelligence. Employees received unexpected bonuses, Family health plans were expanded. A suggestion box was created, and it was actually read. One afternoon, Clara was stocking items in the aisle when she noticed something different. The shelves were lower, the products were better organized, and a small poster had been placed at eye level. "You are not invisible, you are essential." She stood there for a long time, tears filling her eyes. At that moment, Eduardo arrived, holding 2 coffees in hand. "I was hoping to find you here," he said softly. Clara accepted the coffee, still stunned. "You did this?" Eduardo smiled. "With a little help." "I can't believe it. You shouldn't have had to fight so hard just to be seen." Clara looked at him, her expression now more open, less guarded. "You've changed." Eduardo didn't deny it. "You changed me." They stood in silence for a moment, sipping their coffee between the cleaning supplies and the detergent aisle, surrounded by everything mundane, and yet in the presence of something sacred. "I still don't know who you really are," Clara admitted. "I know your heart. But your life? Your world? I'm not part of it." "You're right," Eduardo replied. "My world never deserved you. But if you let me, I'd like to rebuild it. With you at the center." Clara gave a half smile, wounded, hopeful, uncertain. "You say that now, but when the world sees us together, will you still stand by me?" Eduardo looked into her eyes. "I'll stand by you until the world sees you as I see you." That was the moment Clara realized. This wasn't about a rich man trying to fix things with money. This was a man who had been broken open by grace, and everything that was being rebuilt inside him started with her. In the weeks that followed Donna Rosa's healing, Eduardo found himself swallowed by an inner conflict that consumed him day and night. His conversations with Clara had grown deeper, more personal. He caught himself telling her about dreams he'd never shared with anyone, fears he had buried long ago, and desires he had never fully acknowledged. Clara, too, was opening up. She talked about her hard childhood, about how she had found God during her darkest hours, and about her simple dream of a peaceful life with someone who truly loved her. And when she spoke about love, Eduardo's heart raced in a way he hadn't felt in decades. He was falling in love, not just with her kind smile or humble strength, but with the purity of her soul, her unshakable faith, and her ability to see joy in the simplest things. But how could he tell her the truth? How could he say that he was the owner of the company she worked for? How could he confess that he had been hiding that since the day they met? "Do you have a family?" Clara asked one day during a quiet moment. Eduardo hesitated. Technically, he had an ex-wife, but their marriage had ended long ago, broken by ambition and emotional distance. He had 2 grown children who barely spoke to him, children who saw him only as a bank account. "I don't really have a family," he said honestly. "I have kids, but they grew up without me. I was always working, building the empire, and I forgot to build a home. Does that make you sad?" "Very. I have everything I thought I wanted, but no one to share it with. No one who truly cares." Clara gently touched his hand. "Well, you have me. I care." Eduardo felt a lump in his throat. When was the last time someone had said that to him with such honesty? "Clara, I need to tell you something." "What is it?" He opened his mouth, but the words wouldn't come. "How do you say that everything you've shared was real, but that you've left out the biggest detail of all? That you're not just a kind man who visits the store, but the man who owns the entire chain?" I'm not exactly who you think I am." Clara smiled gently. "I know you're different. From the beginning, I sensed something unique. You don't speak or act like the others. You carry yourself like someone from a different world." Eduardo was surprised. "You knew?" "I knew you weren't just another customer, but that doesn't matter to me. What matters is who you are here, with me. What matters is that you treat me like I matter." Eduardo's heart sank. She had noticed the difference, but still didn't know the full truth, and now the weight of that hidden truth was almost unbearable. That night, Eduardo spent hours praying. It was still new to him, this thing called prayer, but Clara had taught him it was simply opening your heart. "God, I don't know what to do. I love her, and I feel she's starting to love me too. But I lied. Not about my heart, but about my life. How can I tell her now without losing her? How do I explain that I'm the kind of man she's always been warned about?" The answer didn't come right away, but Eduardo felt peace settle in. He knew he had to tell her the truth, but he also knew the moment had to be right, because Clara needed to see that he was more than the money. And what he didn't know was that God was already setting the stage for the moment when truth would be revealed, not just to test their love, but their faith in something far greater than either of them could see. It was a Friday afternoon when Clara received devastating news. Her mother, Donna Rosa, had suffered a stroke. She was rushed to the hospital unconscious, and the prognosis wasn't good. The doctor said the first few hours would be critical, and Clara felt her world crumble. She called the church and asked for prayer. She asked her co-workers for help covering her shift. And when she sat down in the hospital hallway, the only thing she could do was cry. Her faith was strong, but she was human. She loved her mother more than anything. Eduardo found out through a friend at the company. He didn't think twice. He canceled his meetings, got in his car, and drove straight to the hospital. When he saw Clara sitting alone in that sterile hallway, he barely recognized her. Her shoulders were hunched, her eyes red and tired, her hands trembling from worry. He sat beside her in silence. She didn't even look at him. She just leaned her head on his shoulder and wept. "She's all I have," Clara whispered. "She raised me alone, gave up everything for me, and now I can't do anything for her." Eduardo wrapped an arm around her gently. "You're not alone. I'm here." And he meant it. For hours, he stayed by her side, bringing water, talking to doctors, holding her hand in silence. And it was in that moment, her most fragile, most vulnerable moment, that the truth came out. One of the hospital employees, recognizing Eduardo, approached him respectfully. "Mr. Rodriguez, the private suite is ready. We've moved the patient as you requested. If you need anything else, please let me know." Clara froze. She looked at Eduardo, confused. "Rodriguez?" The nurse smiled. "Yes, ma'am. Eduardo Rodriguez, the owner of Supermax." Silence fell between them like a thunderclap. Clara pulled away slowly, her face stunned. You're the owner?" Eduardo stood up. "Yes, Clara, You lied to me?" Her voice cracked with disbelief. "All this time you let me talk to you like you were just another customer? I never lied about what I felt. I didn't know how to tell you. I didn't want you to see me the way the world does. So you hid the truth. I wanted you to see me for who I am inside, not what I own. You helped me find myself again. You made me want to be better." Clara stood up. Tears streamed down her face, not just from her mother's condition now, but from the pain of betrayal. "I opened my heart to you," she said softly. "I trusted you. I thought you were different." "I am," Eduardo pleaded. "Clara, please. Everything I did, it was because of you, because of what you showed me. Your faith changed me." But Clara didn't respond. She walked away in silence and entered her mother's hospital room. Eduardo remained there in the hallway, heart shattered. He had done everything to become a better man. But the truth, when revealed without preparation, had caused pain. And that was the last thing he ever wanted to do to her. He prayed for Clara, for Donna Rosa, for forgiveness. And he realized something profound. Sometimes, even when we have the best intentions, our silence becomes a wound. And healing takes more than just love. It takes time, truth, and humility. Clara didn't sleep that night. She stayed by her mother's bedside in the hospital, praying silently with her hands wrapped around Donna Rosa's fragile fingers. But no matter how many times she prayed, the silence on the other side felt unbearable. It wasn't the first time Clara had faced silence from heaven. In her most difficult moments, she had learned to trust God, even when she didn't understand. But now it felt different. Now there was betrayal in her heart, pain, confusion. She had believed she'd finally found someone she could trust, someone real. And then the mask fell. She didn't know if she was angrier at Eduardo for hiding the truth, or at herself for letting her heart believe it could be loved by someone like him. "God, why?" she whispered in the middle of the night. "Why did you allow me to feel something so deep for someone who wasn't who I thought he was?" No answer came. Only the sound of hospital machines beeping rhythmically, and her mother's slow, steady breathing. But while Clara struggled in silence, Eduardo was fighting his own battle. He spent the night driving aimlessly through the city. He stopped at the chapel at dawn and fell to his knees, not to ask for anything, but just to surrender. "I messed up," he said aloud. "I didn't mean to hurt her. I just didn't want to be judged by what I have. I wanted her to love me for who I am. But I see now, love doesn't grow in shadows. It grows in the light. The next morning, Clara was surprised by a simple delivery at the hospital. It wasn't flowers. It wasn't expensive chocolates. It was a small handwritten letter, folded in half and tied with twine. Inside, Eduardo wrote, "I won't ask you to forgive me now. I just want to thank you. You showed me how far I had drifted from the man I once hoped to be. You reminded me that purpose matters more than profit. And love, true love, cannot be earned with gestures or bought with gifts. It has to be built, brick by brick, with truth and humility. If one day your heart is ready, I'll be here, no longer as a stranger, but as a man who finally knows what it means to love." Clara read the letter several times. She cried, not tears of pain but of release, because in those words, she didn't see a powerful man trying to justify himself. She saw a broken man who had chosen to change. And she also realized something else. God had not been silent. He had been speaking the whole time, through gestures, through growth, through grace. The answer hadn't come in thunder or miracles. It had come through love. Donna Rosa began to improve slowly. Each day, Clara felt more peace, and with that peace, space opened in her heart to hear God again. In one of her visits to the hospital chapel, she knelt down and prayed, "Thank you for the silence, because it taught me to listen deeper. And thank you for Eduardo, not for who he was, but for who you're shaping him to become." She didn't know what the future held, but one thing was clear. God was still writing the story, and sometimes he uses silence not to withhold answers, but to prepare hearts for a love deeper than words could ever explain. 2 weeks had passed since Eduardo's letter. Clara hadn't responded, not because she didn't want to, but because she didn't know how. Inside her, emotions were still tangled. Pain and gratitude, disappointment and admiration. What he had done was wrong, but what he had become was real. And in that in-between space, she waited. Donna Rosa had recovered well. She was discharged and now rested at home, weaker but lucid. Clara had taken time off work to care for her and also to breathe. She hadn't seen Eduardo since that day at the hospital. Until one Saturday morning there was a knock at the door. Clara looked through the window and froze. It was him. Eduardo stood there, not in a suit, not holding gifts, just him. Simple, nervous, holding a paper bag. Clara hesitated, but opened the door. "Good morning," he said softly. "I brought soup." She didn't say anything, just stepped aside and let him in. Eduardo walked to the kitchen. He placed the bag on the table and began to unpack. Homemade soup, 2 bowls, a loaf of bread. "You cooked?" she asked, surprised. "I tried," he smiled. "Don't get your hopes up, but I followed a recipe." He served the soup in silence. They sat at the table. It felt surreal, like they had done this before in another life. "How's your mom?" he asked. "Better. Resting." "That's good. I've been praying for her." Clara looked at him surprised. "You pray now?" "Not very well, but I try. You taught me that prayer isn't about perfect words." Silence returned, but this time it wasn't heavy. It was healing. After lunch, Eduardo stood up. "I didn't come to ask for anything. I just wanted to see if you were okay. To let you know, I'm still here, and I'll wait as long as it takes." He turned to leave, but before reaching the door, Clara spoke. "Wait." He turned back. "Sit with me a bit longer." Eduardo sat. They stayed on the couch talking about Donna Rosa, about small everyday things, about faith, not about the past, not about the pain, just about life. And somewhere in the middle of that conversation, something shifted. Clara looked at him, not as the man who lied, but as the man who returned, who changed, who stayed. "Do you regret it?" she asked. "What?" "Having met me." Eduardo looked at her, eyes full of truth. "Meeting you saved me." Tears welled up in Clara's eyes. Not because she was sad, but because she finally understood. This wasn't about betrayal anymore. It was about restoration. Sometimes God allows the heart to break, not to punish, but to rebuild it stronger. And in Eduardo's eyes, Clara saw a man who had been broken, but rebuilt through love. 6 months passed. In that time, Eduardo didn't push. He didn't pressure. He simply showed up, little by little, helping with Donna Rosa, joining Clara and her neighbors at church, learning to cook simple meals, listening more than speaking. He rebuilt trust not with grand declarations, but with consistency. Clara watched all this in silence. And every day something inside her softened, not because Eduardo was perfect, but because he had become humble. And that made all the difference. One evening, as the sun painted the sky in soft orange and gold, Clara found Eduardo on the porch of her house, sitting quietly, holding a notebook. She sat beside him. "What are you writing?" she asked. He smiled. "Plans. For work? For us?" She raised an eyebrow. "Us?" Eduardo closed the notebook, turned to her and took a deep breath. "I don't have a ring. I don't have a grand speech. But I have something I didn't before. Conviction." Clara's heart began to race. Conviction of what? That I was born to love you. That everything I built before you was just a structure. But with you, I found the foundation. Tears welled in her eyes. Eduardo reached into his pocket, not for a ring but for a small folded paper. He handed it to her. Clara opened it. It was a prayer, written by him. "Lord, may I learn to love Clara the way you love me, with patience, with truth, with humility. Let this love be a testimony, not of success but of grace." Clara looked at him speechless. "I want to marry you," he said simply, "but only if you feel peace in your heart. Only if you still believe God is writing this story with us." Clara didn't respond immediately. She just took his hand, held it tight, and rested her head on his shoulder. And that silence was her answer. Because love doesn't always need words. Sometimes the truest yes is spoken in tears, and in presence. The wedding was not grand. There were no luxury cars, no fancy venue, no gala invitations, just a small church on a quiet street, the same one Clara had gone to every Sunday, the same place where Eduardo had first learned to pray. The guests were neighbors, co-workers, church friends, people who had walked with them through the tears, doubts, and prayers. Clara wore a simple white dress, borrowed from a friend. Eduardo wore a plain gray suit, but the sparkle in their eyes made them the most elegant couple anyone had ever seen. Donna Rosa, fully recovered, held Clara's bouquet and couldn't stop smiling. She had prayed for years for her daughter's happiness, and now she saw the answer, right before her eyes. The ceremony was emotional. The pastor spoke not of fairy tales but of covenant, of love that forgives, of grace that rebuilds, of new beginnings born from humility. Eduardo's vows were short, but powerful. "I once built empires without purpose. Now I want to build a home with you, with God, with truth." Clara's voice trembled as she replied, "I once believed I wasn't worthy of being seen. Now I know God sees me, and in your eyes I see His mercy." They exchanged rings, simple, gold without engravings, but full of meaning. After the ceremony, there was cake in the church courtyard, children playing and joyful laughter. The sky was clear, the sun soft, and in a corner of that small celebration, Eduardo knelt beside a group of employees from the supermarket. "I want to thank you," he said, his voice breaking. "You taught me more than any business school ever did. You reminded me that real value isn't in products but in people." One of the employees, visibly moved, replied, "You didn't just change the company, Mr. Eduardo. You changed lives." Years passed. Clara and Eduardo founded a small community center, offering courses, food, and support for families in need. They called it House of Grace, not because of what they had received, but because of what they had learned to give. Every Friday, Eduardo would visit one of his stores, not as a boss but as a servant. He stocked shelves, he listened to employees, he prayed with them when they allowed. Clara continued to serve with the same humility. Her light never faded. She became a reference not for her position, but for her love. One day a young girl at the community center asked, "Mrs. Clara, how did you and Mr. Eduardo fall in love?" Clara smiled. "He saw me, really saw me, even when the world didn't. And perhaps that's the greatest miracle in any love story, when someone finally sees us, not for what we have, not for what we lack, but for who we truly are, when no one else is looking." God had written their story not with perfection, but with purpose. He used silence to teach trust. He used pain to prepare the heart. And he used love to redeem everything. Because the most beautiful stories are not the ones that start in castles, but the ones that begin in humility and end in grace. From time to time, Clara and Eduardo would return to that supermarket where everything had begun. They didn't go there to relive memories. They went to serve. to listen to the employees, to talk with customers, to remind themselves of what really matters. They had learned that love isn't built in a moment. It's built in the routine, in the hard days, in the quiet yes that resists the noise of fear. They never had children, but their legacy lived on in the hundreds of lives they touched, in the women Clara mentored, in the young people Eduardo helped go to college, in the elderly who were never again forgotten. And when people asked them the secret to such a deep and lasting love, Clara always responded the same way. We let God write our story. We stopped trying to control everything, Nori, and began to surrender. Eduardo often added, Clara didn't save me with her words. She saved me with her example, with her silence, with her strength, with her faith. They grew old together, not in castles or luxury houses, but in a home where peace lived. And in the garden that Clara had always dreamed of, Eduardo planted the first flowers. He never had a green thumb, but he tried. And every time a flower bloomed, Clara smiled and said, It's never too late to bloom. When Eduardo passed away many years later, the church was full, not of businessmen, but of lives transformed. Clara sat in the front row, white hair tied back, hands wrinkled but steady. She didn't cry loudly. She prayed. Thank you, Lord, she whispered, because you gave me not what I asked, but what I needed. She lived many more years, always serving, always teaching, and when her time came, her last words were simple. He saw me, and God never stopped seeing us. Because in the end, the greatest miracle of that story wasn't the change in Eduardo. It wasn't the wedding. It wasn't even the community center. The greatest miracle was that two wounded hearts met and didn't give up. They let themselves be healed. And through that healing, others were healed too. That's how God works. He takes what the world discards. He picks up what no one sees. And he turns it into a story that echoes in eternity. Because the most beautiful love stories are not the ones with perfect beginnings. They're the ones that allow God to rewrite the ending. Clara leaned in and gently kissed her husband's cheek. When God changes a heart, he changes everything around it. Outside, the sun was rising over the humble neighborhood where two lives had been forever transformed. In the institute that Eduardo and Clara had built together, hundreds of families now found dignity in work. In the company, employees were treated like family. In the community, social projects blossomed. But none of that compared to the transformation happening every day in that modest kitchen, where a wealthy man learned that true riches are found in a love that serves, and where a simple woman discovered that her faith could move mountains, even the kind hardened by money. The story of Eduardo and Clara proves that God truly writes straight through crooked lines, that true love not only transforms hearts, but entire societies, and that sometimes the greatest revolution begins with a simple conversation between two people who dare to be vulnerable with one another. When God changes a heart, he changes everything around it. In the next video, he paid a homeless woman to carry his child. Then the unthinkable happened. A story about motherhood, redemption, and a faith that blooms in the most unlikely places.